In this 25th anniversary year of September 11th, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation continues to honor America's heroes. Heroes like Fire Lieutenant Michael Wells, who was inspired by 9/11 to serve his community. After 14 dedicated years of service, he lost his battle with occupational cancer, leaving behind his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. Tunnel to Towers honored Lieutenant Wells by paying off the family's mortgage in recognition of his sacrifices. Donate $11 monthly and amplify your impact with a car or land donation. Go to T2T.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now diving into the deep end of the Stone Zone. Just minutes ago, I posted on social media a video of the dancing that was going on in my house when we learned that former FBI Director James Comey had been indicted by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. In this very specific case, he was charged with threatening the life of the President of the United States. Now, previously, FBI Director Comey slipped the punch in the Eastern District of Virginia in really what was an open and shut case. Comey testified under oath before Congress, lying 254 separate times, claiming that he had never taken sealed information and given it to a third party and directed them to leak it to the media in order to embarrass President Donald Trump. But prosecutors found an email in which he did exactly that. He hooked up with his law school buddy Dan Richmond, and he attached sealed and classified information and directed that he leak it to the New York Times. The only reason that case did not move forward is because 3 separate federal judges violated both their oath of office and their canon of ethics to attack the appointed acting U.S. Attorney, Lindsay Halligan, who brought the case against Comey. So in order to dispose of this case, instead of ever looking at the actual evidence, they claimed that Halligan had been improperly appointed to her position, and of course that matter went to appeal. Now, she'll win that on appeal. I should say the Justice Department will win that on appeal, but by the time they do so, the statute of limitations to charge Comey for that particular lie will have expired. So he escaped justice there, but I'm not sure he will escape it this time. James Comey now stands in precisely the cold spotlight of the accused, the indicted, and hopefully the soon-to-be convicted former FBI director. The man who spent years cultivating the image of a granite-hewn moral sentinel has been indicted for a second time now by a federal grand jury. This latest case reportedly arises from the notorious Instagram photograph in which seashells were arranged to read 8647, accompanied by a breezy caption about a beach walk and a curious shell formation. Millions of Americans instantly understood the implication. 86 is a mob term. Everybody who's watched any Law and Order understands that it means to remove, to reject, to eliminate, to whack. And 47, of course, refers to President Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States. The meaning was plain enough to any citizen with common sense and a pulse. Once again, public outrage erupted and the post vanished. Then came the familiar Comey refrain: misunderstanding, innocence, surprise, lofty opposition to violence, and wounded confusion that anyone would interpret the message as threatening. It was the bureaucrats' version of being caught with smoke pouring from the kitchen while insisting no one can prove who lit the stove. But James Comey is no naive retiree stumbling through the language of the modern age. He's the former U.S. Attorney, former Deputy Attorney General, former FBI Director, and one of the most media-conscious government officials of the last generation. He's also outrageously self-righteous, outrageously pompous, and I find him outrageously sanctimonious. He understands symbolism. He understands the coded language. He understands how political rhetoric migrates through television screens, social media feeds, and the fever swamps of unstable minds. That's exactly why this is indeed a serious matter. America has endured repeated assassination attempts, political violence, and a coarsening culture in which extremists increasingly mistake theatrical menace for civil engagement. In such an environment, a former FBI director doesn't not just enjoy the luxury of playing coy with numerals and then pleading innocence when the government notices. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it with intent, and he knew better. This indictment also significant because it marks Comey's second trip to the criminal dock, as I said, in roughly 6 months. His first indictment, which was brought in 2025, involved allegations of false statements to Congress and obstruction tied to his Senate testimony concerning matters connected to the Clinton email investigation era. That case collapsed amid procedural irregularities, questions regarding prosecutorial authority, and what the court reportedly described as government misconduct and investigative missteps. When, in fact, Lindsay Halligan, who's not a criminal attorney, took that case before a grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia and got an indictment, something that everybody said she could not possibly do. That was only necessary because the acting U.S. Attorney, Eric Siebert, who was strongly supported by Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, that's a tip-off right there, had failed to disclose to the court that his father-in-law, that is his wife's father, was actually the godfather for Comey's daughter, and that his father-in-law had served as a personal attorney for Comey. That's an egregious conflict of interest. He should have recused himself from the very beginning, but instead, he was planning to give James Comey a pass. In fact, a grand jury had been impaneled, and they were moving very swiftly to exonerate Comey. Somewhat different than the way I was handled in Washington, D.C. You know, whenever James Comey appears, confusion seems to follow like exhaust from a badly tuned engine. But for years, Comey postured as the nation's ethical headmaster while leaving a wake of institutional wreckage behind him. He inserted himself in the 2016 election by publicly castigating Hillary Clinton's conduct while declining prosecution. But let's stop and think for a moment. It isn't really his decision as to whether Hillary Clinton should have been prosecuted. That would have only been up to the Attorney General of the United States. Yet in his press conference, he presided over the opening phase of Crossfire Hurricane after first declaring that he had gone through Hillary Clinton's emails, which were discovered on a Friday before the election. We're expected to believe that 336,000 emails were reviewed over the weekend, when over a year before he'd had Hillary Clinton's emails and had never taken action. He was the one who essentially set up Crossfire Hurricane, the now infamous Russian collusion saga that convulsed the entire country, relied in part on poisoned opposition research, what James Comey knew was paid for by Hillary Clinton. That's the famous Steele dossier. And they claimed falsely that the Democrat National Committee had been the target of a Russian intelligence hack, for which there is no evidence whatsoever, other than the imagination of his fellow leftist combatant, John Brennan, the CIA director, himself a convert to Islam, and the man who signed 4 of the 8 hijackers' visas, those hijackers who attacked the America on 9/11. This is, of course, the same John Brennan who got caught spying on a U.S. Senate committee when it was examining his misconduct and the use of illegal torture. But that's how it is with James Comey. He leaked memorandum of private presidential conversations through intermediaries in violation of the law. He monetized grievances through his books, his speeches, and his television appearances, and he transformed the office of FBI director into a vanity platform. Always the sermon, always the spotlight, always the self-regard. Now the old magistrate finds himself judged. The legal standard in this new case is substantial. Prosecutors reportedly must show that Comey subjectively understood the message would be perceived as a threat. Courts do not lightly criminalize speech, nor should they. political expression, even vulgar political expression, for which I am sometimes known, occupies a protected place in our republic. But ambiguity, deliberately employed by a sophisticated actor, is not the same thing as innocence. A man who spends a lifetime communicating through implication cannot suddenly claim illiteracy by implication. That is the central irony in the entire Comey saga. He built his career in the gray areas between what was said and what was meant, between what could be proven and what could be insinuated, between law and theater. He weaponized suggestion when it benefited him, and now asks the nation to believe suggestion is meaningless when it implicates him. Sorry, no sale. Whether prosecutors prevail is a question for the courts, but whether a jury convicts is another matter entirely. But politically and morally, this indictment carries force. It reminds the American people that titles do not confer sainthood, media adulation does not erase misconduct, and bureaucratic pedigree does not place one above scrutiny. James Comey once moved through Washington as if it carved from marble. In truth, he was always fashioned with something much more brittle: vanity, ambition, and the intoxicating belief that rules were for other people. Eventually, even brittle monuments crack. If you're just tuning in, I'm Roger Stone, and you're listening to The Stone Zone here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. I noticed that my good friend Laura Loomer is spiraling again, unleashing a frenzied torrent of tweets blaming the likes of Candace Owens, Joe Kent, and Tucker Carlson for recent acts of leftists and Islamic terrorism. While I don't support the anti-Trump comments of these people by any means, the notion that deranged leftists are being radicalized by those three is completely and utterly absurd. Laura Loomer is posting deranged propaganda, not serious analysis. It is leftist radicals, Antifa thugs, pro-Hamas encampment militants, and deranged Democrats radicalized by the fake news media who are drawing inspiration from their own side's fever swamps. They are on platforms like Reddit and Blue Sky and an echo chamber of bile. They are the enemy combatants we must be focused on. Blaming conservative dissenters, putting out provocative takes for clicks for leftist terror is a grotesque inversion that lets the real culprits off the hook. I know Laura Loomer. I've written quite a bit about her. She is no longer fighting legitimate enemies of the MAGA movement. She's now hunting personal foes while handing the left a free pass. Her obsession with settling scores, family dirt, invented conspiracies, endless feuds has eclipsed her once laudable truth-seeking pursuits. Laura Loomer's well-documented history of mental instability, including the fact that she was involuntarily institutionalized at least twice, according to the testimony of her own father, and her inability to own guns because she is such a danger to herself and others, makes her conduct particularly alarming. So for the sake of the conservative movement in the country, it is time she checks back into the loony bin once and for all, for the good of America, before she gets even more gruesome plastic surgery and morphs from Jigsaw into the Elephant Man before your very eyes. This infighting on the right distracts from the engines of radicalization. Democrat leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy being two of the absolutely worst. Jeffries has branded President Trump a racist dictator whose agenda threatens democracy and minorities. And Murphy has escalated, painting Trump as mentally unstable and invoking the 25th Amendment while framing him as an existential threat. This is eliminationist rhetoric. When congressional leaders cast the president as a threat to the republic's survival, unbalanced followers hear a permission slip for violence. By any means necessary stops being a metaphor and becomes a mission. Such inflammatory garbage directly fuels incidents like the attack on President Trump at this past weekend's White House Correspondents' Dinner. The same toxic atmosphere preceded Butler, Pennsylvania. Democrats' words have body counts. Yet the Secret Service catastrophic failures compound that peril. The lapses at the Correspondents' Dinner were unforgivable, another embarrassing breach that allowed violence to almost reach the president. This wasn't a one-off. It was a chilling repeat of the near assassination in Butler, where unsecured rooftops, ignored warnings, and operational breakdowns nearly ended President Donald Trump's life. Under Director Sean M. Curran, the agency continues to fumble basic protective duties. Curran, a 20th-year veteran Trump tapped in January of 2025 after leading his personal detail, was supposed to restore competence. Instead, these repeated failures by the Secret Service expose either shocking incompetence or deeper institutional rot that even a loyal appointee does not seem to be able to fix. I'm Roger Stone. We'll be right back.
Let Century Management Solutions get you to your next medical appointment. They specialize in non-emergency medical transportation, connecting patients to care, safety, reliability, and on time. Their advanced technology platform seamlessly coordinates patients, healthcare providers, insurers, and transportation partners all in one powerful network. With over 200 trusted transportation providers, they deliver scalable solutions backed by real-time tracking and complete transparency. Go to SENTRYMS.com.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And you're back in the Stone Zone. As I said this weekend, assassination has been all too common in American history, particularly in the modern age. Of course, President Harry Truman survived an assassination attempt by Puerto Rican nationalists. President John F. Kennedy, of course, brutally murdered in the streets of Dallas in 1963. I believe at the hands of a plot that was engineered by Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson. I wrote a New York Times best-selling book on that. Of course, there was an attempt on the life of President Gerald Ford by a follower of Charles Manson. There actually was an attempt on Richard Nixon's life in Miami Beach, according to CIA agent Gerald Hemmings. And, of course, we're well aware of the 3 attempts on the life of President Donald Trump. I think Trump himself said it when he said it is those presidents, like Lincoln, for example, who were most impactful, who they've tried to kill. But the real question here is, why does the Secret Service still suck at its one job, keeping the president from getting threatened more than any chief executive in history alive? Communications blackouts, inadequate perimeters, resource mismanagement, and a culture of complacency seems to persist. Butler should have triggered a total overhaul of the Secret Service. Instead, what we get is more of the same. President Trump, in my opinion, should fire the current director immediately. Loyalty to Trump doesn't excuse presiding over a no-fail mission that repeatedly failed. The agency needs immediate sweeping reform with new leadership, depoliticization, and accountability that actually means something. Half measures and excuses are no longer tolerable when lives and the republic are on the line. Senator Majority Leader John Thune should also resign, if you ask me. His tepid approach, learned from a lifetime of serving the establishment, completely undermines the aggressive mandate President Trump has delivered. When deep state resistance, border chaos, and security breakdowns demand a street fighter, Thune wilts under pressure. Republicans need some spine in their leadership, not just another gutless wonder. We can no longer tolerate people like Laura Loomer's sideshows or Democrat incitement, Secret Service malpractice, or weak GOP stewardship. The time for leadership is now. Right-thinking citizens must zero in on real threats. President Trump survived Butler by providence. He is there by the hand of God, by the grace of God, to lead a revival of this nation, and I'm still convinced that America's greatest days, a golden age of peace, prosperity, security, justice, and law and order, lie just ahead. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Well, in my opinion, peace through strength is the only way to achieve lasting peace in the Middle East. This is not the neocon foreign adventurism of the Bushes and the Clintons and the Bidens and the Obamas. This is the peace through strength doctrine of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan. So let's dispense with the polite fiction. The Middle East does not reward wishful thinking, it punishes it. For too long, policymakers have addressed hard realities in soft language, calling fragile ceasefires breakthroughs, strained alliances temporary disagreements, and unstable political systems transitions. That approach has not delivered peace, it has actually prolonged instability. A more direct assessment is overdue. Progress in this region depends on confronting facts head-on. Ceasefires are often temporary, adversaries are deeply mistrustful, alliances require constant maintenance, and governance models that work in theory often fail in practice. Ignoring these truths doesn't make them disappear, it just makes them more dangerous. Take the recent Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. Describing it as a timeout is not criticism, it's accuracy. Anyone who's followed the history of conflict between Hezbollah and Israel understands that ceasefires here are rarely permanent solutions. They are pauses in a longer struggle, shaped by deep mistrust and reinforcement by decades of violations, rearmament, and proxy escalation. So that mistrust is the central obstacle to peace. No party in this conflict has a clean record, although the Iranian-backed militia groups, most notably Hezbollah, are by far the worst offenders. The right for Israel to defend itself should be seen as absolute, but that should not preclude us from understanding the conflict from all perspectives. Acknowledging reality is not moral equivalence, as we must understand the nuances of the conflict to be able to achieve our goals. Durable peace cannot be built on denial. It must be built on enforcement, verification, and a sober understanding of incentives. Hezbollah remains a designated terrorist organization responsible for attacks that have killed Americans and destabilized the region. There's no ambiguity there, but experience has shown that eliminating such groups outright, especially one embedded in society and backed by a state like Iran, is not achievable through military force alone. Decades of mowing the lawn have only caused more resentment as collateral damage causes blowback and emboldens extremists in the region. Tactical victories, absent a broader strategy, are known to regenerate the very threats they seek to destroy. The goal, then, is not naive eradication, it is degradation. Reducing operational capacity to a level where political structures and state institutions can assert control. In Lebanon, that means strengthening sovereignty and enabling a system that reflects its complex sectarian balance. It also means pairing pressure with diplomacy, weakening military capabilities while creating conditions for governance and economic recovery. Ending cycles of violence requires more than force. It also requires a pathway out of perpetual conflict. The same realism applies beyond the battlefield, you see. Consider the ongoing impasse over Turkey and the F-35 program. That dispute, triggered by Ankara's purchase of Russia's S-400 system, has strained relations with NATO at a time when unity is essential for warding off elevated threats from China and Russia. Turkey is not a peripheral player, it's a central ally of the United States, hosting critical U.S. assets and contributing to collective security in the region. Allowing a single dispute to fracture that relationship undermines the broader strategic goals. Yet, resolution cannot come at the expense of American security. Any path forward must ensure that sensitive technology, like the F-35 Lightning II, remains fully protected. This is where disciplined diplomacy matters. A solution is possible, one that removes the S-400 risk, restores Turkey's role in the F-35 ecosystem, and reinforces NATO's cohesion. Such an outcome would only strengthen alliances but also deny Russia the leverage it seeks. It is not about concessions, it's about aligning interests in a way that enhances collective strength. That's why I'm particularly proud of our ambassador, Tom Barrack, a man I've known since 1972, who's doing an amazing job, a difficult job. He's also the president's special envoy to Syria. Perhaps the most controversial argument, however, concerns governance itself. The idea that strong leadership, whether in monarchies or centralized republics, has often delivered more stability in the Middle East than rapid democratization may go against common Western fairy tale norms, but it's empirically sound. The aftermath of the Arab Spring offers a sobering case study. In many cases, attempts to quickly impose Western-style democratic systems led to fragmentation, conflict, and renewed authoritarianism. By contrast, several Gulf monarchies have achieved measurable progress, economic diversification, modernization, and improved living standards for their people. These systems are not perfect by any means, nor should they be beyond criticism, but they have, in many cases, provided a degree of stability that allowed development to take root. Stability must be seen as a prerequisite for both democratic values and human rights. Institutions cannot flourish amid chaos. Rights cannot be meaningfully exercised in the absence of security. Supporting effective governance, whatever its form, can create the conditions under which broader freedoms eventually emerge. Even in more complex systems, strong leadership has played a defining role. Israel, often cited as the region's most robust democracy, has depended on decisive leadership to navigate constant security threats. Turkey also illustrates how centralized authority can deliver economic growth and regional influence. The point is not to endorse any single model. It is to reject the one-size-fits-all thinking. The Middle East is not a laboratory for exporting political templates. It's a region shaped by history, identity, and political pressures that demand tailored approaches. In all of these cases, from ceasefires to alliances to governances, the underlying principle is realism in service of stability. That means applying pressure where necessary, engaging partners where possible, and refusing to be guided by illusions. It means prioritizing outcomes over rhetoric and recognizing that imperfect solutions are often the only ones available. When U.S. foreign policy is dictated by idealism, it's a disaster for the region, and the taxpayers ultimately bear the cost. The pursuit of peace is not about pretending conflicts are simpler than they are. It's about managing complex situations with discipline and clarity at all times. In my view, the Trump administration is doing precisely that. Now I want to try something a little different. I'm going to take your questions. You can go to Ask Stone at stonezone.com. That's Ask Stone at stonezone.com right now, and we will take your questions. We have a few left over from the weekend, so I'm going to start there. Michael in Miami, Florida says, let's see, Roger, you have helped shape victories for Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. What is the one timeless strategic principle that still wins elections today? That's a pretty broad question, but the real answer is to understand that repetition and simple messaging are crucial in communicating in any political campaign. It always seemed odd to me. I'm not a big fan of Karl Fatboy Rove or George W. Bush, but they ran an almost flawless campaign against John Kerry. John Kerry seemed to think that once you said something one time, everybody heard it, and you could then just move on and say something else, where the Bush campaign repeated their central message over and over and over again, driving it home. So that old advertising adage, KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it simple, stupid, that stands in politics as well. Political messaging must be repeated over and over again, particularly in this diffuse media situation in which it's unlike the days when we just had 3 television networks and a handful of national news magazines. Today, thanks to the internet, we have hundreds of choices, maybe thousands. That's also true for print media. Now, while Newsweek and Time and Life and Look have gone by the wayside, and we have national newspapers, well, they pose as newspapers. They're really newsletters for the Democrat National Committee. I'm thinking the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, no longer credible sources of information. I had a journalist from CBS contact me this morning and say that he had read a piece about the pardon by President Donald Trump of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, something I advocated for with the president, having never met Hernandez, never spoken to him or his attorneys, but read an eloquent long, I think it was 8-page letter that he had written to President Donald Trump, in which he made it very clear that he had been framed. You see, Hernandez, as the president of Honduras, had signed the first extradition treaty in the history of the country, and he extradited the two largest narco traffickers, the two largest murderers, the two largest drug dealers in the history of the country. They went to New York, they stood trial, and they were convicted. That was under President Donald Trump. And then when Joe Biden became president, those same two criminals were released from jail. Their sentences were essentially commuted, and they gave false testimony against Hernandez, the very man who had extradited them. Now, if you read that trial transcript very carefully, what you find is that Hernandez was convicted solely on the testimony of two convicted criminals. In other words, where was the evidence of financial transfers to Hernandez? There were none. Where was there evidence that he was involved in the actual moving of drugs? There were none. But this CBS journalist insisted that I must have gotten paid for my advocacy. No, I've been through this myself. They did to Juan Orlando Hernandez precisely what they tried to do to President Donald Trump, what they tried to do to me. The facts speak for themselves. There's a great multi-part series now over at artvoice.com that lays this all out chapter and verse. So I realize that if the Democrats retake the House, or someday when they return to power, all of this will be examined. I don't fear discovery. There's nothing to discover. All I did was read a letter and then ask my own personal attorney to go to Pacer and print out all of the documents, including the trial transcript. And I found one really strange thing. You see, President Juan Orlando Hernandez's criminal defense lawyer literally disappeared in the middle of his trial. He no longer responded to emails or text messages. When they went to his home and his office, he wasn't there. He vanished into thin air. How coincidental. The judge in his case was allowed to appoint a criminal defense attorney who then worked closely with the government prosecutors to lock up the former president. A man in his 50s got a 30-year sentence, and then just to make it worse, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, pulled the visas of Hernandez's wife, his two daughters, and his son. So the man has not seen his own family now in 5 years. He's living in the Miami area because it is not safe for him to go back to Honduras. But this is an enduring story of justice. President Donald Trump did what was right. Anyone can examine this trial. So for those who say, well, why did you arrest Maduro, who was a narco trafficker, but you released Hernandez, is because Hernandez was not a drug trafficker. The public record will prove that. I'm prepared for any scrutiny that may come down the road. I prayed fervently about this before forwarding Hernandez's letter to President Trump, and I believe up to this minute that I absolutely did the right thing. Those who are online today attacking him yet again, claiming that he was caught on tape lamenting the fact that the media was biased and that somehow invalidates the pardon, is an absurdity. The people who were actively involved in moving drugs were the Anaya family, Tony and his family, who took power after Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was moved out of the way, which is what this is all about. So if anybody ought to be prosecuted for drug trafficking, I would say it is the immediate past leadership of the Hondurans. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone right here on the Red Apple Audio Network. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone, and once again, we're taking your questions by email. You can send them to askstone@stonezone.com. That's askstone@stonezone.com. Here's a question from Carlos in Tampa, Florida, who says, looking at the 2026 midterms, what's the single biggest mistake Republicans can make between now and Election Day? First of all, I think in the big, beautiful bill, the president has has created the backdrop for what could be a very successful election. It does take some time for the biggest tax cut in American history to kick in. Also, the tax against retirement has been repealed. The tax for tips has been repealed, and 88% of those on Social Security will pay no tax on their Social Security payments. These are profound changes. I continue to be outraged by Jerome Too Late Powell, who has kept interest rates artificially high. If you base the interest rates, the interest rates on the unemployment rate and the inflation rate, he should already have cut rates. But it's interesting that in this recent vote, in which the Fed essentially voted to just keep it steady at the same rate, there were 4 dissenters. That hasn't happened in many decades. Now, adding insult to injury, Jerome Powell has decided that he's going to remain as a Fed governor after his term as chairman is over. The arrogance of this non-economist lawyer is profound. He's the one who's acting politically. To go back to your question, the single biggest mistake Republicans can make is not delivering accountability and justice when it comes to the Russian collusion hoax and the stolen election of 2020. President Trump promised his voters that he would do that, and now Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche seems to be moving in the right direction with the new indictment of James Comey for threatening the life of the president. But there needs to be more follow-through. Those two twin issues, I think, will ignite the non-Republican Trump base. People want to know whether our elections are on the up and up. They want to know about the 300,000 paper ballots that just suddenly appeared at 3 o'clock in the morning in 3 swing states. They want to know whether the electronic voting machines are secure or whether they can and have been manipulated. These are not complicated issues. So I do think Republicans have to deliver on both of them, or there will not be an energized base for the president. Beyond that, I think we should recognize Republicans enjoy an enormous financial advantage going into this election. They will have somewhere around $6 billion to spend on the midterms. The Democrats are still deeply in debt from their last fiasco, the Kamala Harris campaign. Now, in some ways, that just offsets the fact that ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, and of course the worst of them all, CNN. I often say I don't get my news from CNN for the same reason I don't drink out of the toilet. They provide news coverage for the left. Republicans have to pay with paid advertising to counter that false messaging, and that is how that will work. But we have better candidates. We have better issues. You see, the Democrats have no agenda other than their hatred for Donald Trump. They have no plan to create jobs. They have no plan to control inflation. They have no plans to make housing more affordable and more available. Donald Trump has plans for all of those things. Plus, he has kept his pledge to seal our border, which is ultimately going to result in a drop in crime. We're beginning to see that already. So we have a platform. They have no platform other than their hatred for Donald Trump and their increasing embrace of radical violence. It is hard for me to believe that the once great Democrat Party of Harry Truman, who is the founder of Israel, and the late great John F. Kennedy refuses to denounce anti-Semitism, refuses to denounce bigotry, and increasingly embraces violence. I'm Roger Stone. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. We're here 5 days a week talking about news, history, politics, style, and food, because I like to eat as well as talk politics. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed. You can always tune into the Stone Zone. We're here 5 days a week, and we bring you the inside skinny on what's really happening at Disneyland on the Potomac. That would be Washington, D.C. Until tomorrow, God bless you once again, and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Roger Stone here. Every day you wait, your money loses value, but gold and silver don't follow those same rules. American Sovereign Bullion gives you access to a nationwide wholesaler network, helping you secure aggressive pricing on real physical metals. Call 844-272-2428 now to get your free gold and silver guide to learn how to protect your wealth with physical gold and silver, delivered right to your door or with a gold IRA. Visit ASBGold.com. That's ASBGold.com for your free gold and silver guide today.